Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone, or good evening if you're joining us from Iceland or Europe. My name is Doug Hansen, and I'm the Vice President of the Icelandic National League of the United States. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our very first joint webinar from the INLUS and our Canadian counterpart, the Icelandic National League of North America. Webinars like this make up an important part of our mission outreach and are only possible due to the continued financial support of members, donors, and friends like you. We encourage you to support all the organizations represented here tonight or today, the INLUS, the INLNA, and Icelandic Roots. A couple of technical notes before we begin. So we're using the Zoom webinar format. So in the webinar format, you will not be able to be heard or seen on screen, but we do appreciate your questions. So the way you ask a question to our guests is to use the Q&A button. So look at the bottom of your screen, or if you're on a tablet or a smartphone, it may be off to the side or you may have to swipe, but there's a button that says Q&A, and that stands for question and answer. And so you can type in your questions at any time during the program, and our Dave, our guest, will be answering them at the end. But you can start typing them in whenever you think of them. And the second thing is that this webinar is being recorded. And so if you have friends or members of your Icelandic organization or relatives that would like to see it, you can refer them to our link. And so I'll have that ready and probably in a couple of days, and I'll post it to the INLUS website and also to the INLUS YouTube page, and then I'll also share the links with Icelandic Roots and INLNA for their social media and web presences as well. So with that, let's move on with our program. So our program tonight will be hosted by Natalie Guttormson, who's joining us from Alberta, where they have snow, and I'm in Virginia, where it's near 80 degrees Fahrenheit and beautiful sunny. So quite a difference in weather. But we're delighted to have her with us tonight. And she's the membership director for INLNA, and she's going to be introducing our guest and assisting me with questions. Hi, Natalie.
Thanks, Doug. All right, I'm so excited for this presentation. And I have the joy of introducing Dave Jonasson, a longtime volunteer with Icelandic Roots. Dave's journey with genealogy began soon after his retirement back in 2013. After he entered his family's historical information into Ancestry.com, the late and great George Freeman introduced him to the Icelandic Roots database. After receiving a great deal of data gathering and interpretation assistance from Suna Furstenau and Doreen Christensen Marston, Dave offered to help with the Icelandic Roots database's website. Now, he was uniquely qualified for the job because he has a degree in computer science and over 35 years of experience in IT management. And since then, Dave has been instrumental in the launch of several features of the Icelandic Roots database, including writing the timeline, creating famous ancestor reports, reorganizing the menus for easier navigation, rewriting the relationship calculator, which is a favorite, and making the My Cousins form easier to use. Dave is originally from Winnipeg, but has lived in Denver, Colorado with his wife Jean since 1981. Dave is here today to show us some of the newest features of the Icelandic Roots database that makes researching the emigration story of your Icelandic ancestors easier than ever. So welcome, Dave.
Thanks, Natalie. Let me just share my screen. Can you see that?
Yes.
Good, perfect. Yes, my name is Dave Jonasson, and I have been a volunteer at Icelandic Roots for a long time. They're coming up on their 10-year anniversary, and I've been with them for most of that. My title is IT director, but what I really enjoy doing is rolling up my sleeves and being a genealogist. I can't come close to the skills of many of the genealogists that they do have, but I have been focusing on ships and passenger lists and immigration. That's what I'm basically going to talk about today. So because it didn't turn, there we are. Because we have such a diverse audience, we have, as Doug said, INLUS, INLNA, Icelandic roots, I thought I'd just mention something about Icelandic roots. Those of you who are from Icelandic roots will know what this is, but others may not. You may have never heard of us. It's a 501(c) nonprofit organization, and like I say, we've been around for about 10 years. Mission basically is to educate, preserve, and promote Icelandic heritage, and we do that in a lot of ways. When I started, a main focus was the database, and it still is, but now there's all sorts of other programs. But I think there's a lot of interest from people in North America about their Icelandic ancestors, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Similarly, there's people in Iceland that are worried about or concerned about some of their ancestors that immigrated, like what happened to them. So it's a two-way bridge, and the bridge comes together with immigration. So anyway, we do have a major tree, almost 800,000 people from Viking times to present. We'll be talking about that today. And if you're a member, you have access to this. If you're not a member, I have a slide at the end that'll tell you how to become a member and get access to this. So what we're going to talk about today is, where did we get our immigration information? And then what does it look like on the database? There's two events that we use. One is called Emigration, Iceland to the Americas. And the second one is the arrival passenger lists. I should point out right now that I'm focusing on the first half of the journey. So obviously people left Iceland and they arrived in, I don't know, Markland, in Door Island, Wisconsin, in Alaska, in Winnipeg, wherever. So there's a second half of a journey that happens after you arrived in North America, trains, planes. And aside from one quick comment, I'm really not going to focus on that. I'm focusing on the first half. We're going to leave Iceland and we're going to arrive on a ship in Quebec or New York or whatever. Once we talk about the events, we're going to try to develop the story. We're going to use Natalie and one of her ancestors as an example, because she's a great representative immigrant. And we're going to talk about how we can enhance that story using timelines and stories from people that were immigrating at that time and family immigrations over time. So after about 45 minutes, we're going to have stop for questions, and I will answer questions for as long as you have them. So anyway, I'm ready to start. And where does our information come from? Well, a man called Jonasson Christensen in the middle 70s decided to compile a list of the known documented immigrants. And he published his book. You can see the cover there in 1982. And it's sort of the Bible that we've used for many years, 14,268 people. And probably about 5 years ago, primarily David Johnson, with assistance from Willie Engelson, decided to take this book and to map each of those 14,268 people to a person in our database. And last year, well, I guess actually this year, earlier this year, they completed that exercise. So that's momentous. So that's one source of information. Now, I thought that I would just show you here. We're going to use a lady called Sigurberg Sigfusdóttir, and that's a great-grandmother of Natalie's. The index in Vesturfarskrá is organized by first name, and that's sort of the way they do things in Iceland. If you go there now, the phone book is organized by first name. So you go Sigurberg, and here's all the last names, and there's two Sigfusdóttirs. And I happen to know that Natalie's great-grandmother, immigrated in 1878 from this, and I'm not going to try to pronounce this farm. And I then go to page 36. So on page 36, I have information about that farm and who emigrated. So there's 3 people that emigrated in 1876 and 6 people that immigrated in 1878. So this is the sort of information that's there. It's a very hard book to get a hold of, but the good news is you probably don't need to, because all of this information is on the database now. So what does this look like on the database? So I'm looking at Sigurberg's page, and each person has a number of events, and there's different types of events. For immigrants, there's 2 that we're going to be looking at. One is Emigration Iceland to the Americas. So I'm just going to go back here for 1 second. I should have pointed out that in addition to these people, we know that they left from the port of Seyðisfjörður. They left on the ship SS Queen, and they were going to Quebec. So what you're going to see, if I go in the right direction, is all that information is there in text. Emigrated with parents and 3 siblings. So we have a family of 6, left from the port at Saint-Esprit aboard the Queen, bound for Quebec, 1878. And here's the unpronounceable farm that I'm not going to try. We have a picture of the farm, we have a picture of the ship, and we have a picture of Saint-Esprit. So this is lots of information if I just stopped right there. So let me go to the next source of information. This is passenger lists. This is something that Junius did not have when he was compiling Westervaarschau. And it's allowed us to verify much of his information, and it's allowed us to extend it. So much of what his information came from was parish registers in Iceland and passenger contracts, ticket contracts. And, you know, some of that information was lost, and some of that was destroyed by fire, and some of that just isn't there. And it's amazing that he got 14,000 people. We have found 890 pages with Icelandic immigrants on them, and that covers 16,000 people. So it's a bigger population, and it's, if you had a Venn diagram, it's a large overlap, but there's additions on both sides. We've been able to connect 93%, almost 94% to the database. And let me start by saying this would be an impossible task without the work done by David Jonasson and Willie. I went through many of these, and you try to decipher the name, but if you can't decipher the name, you've got a name and an age and an immigration year, and then you go to the database and you see, sure as shooting, there's a name and an age and an immigration year, and so that's my person. If I didn't find that person, I had to do a lot of sleuthing. And, you know, sometimes if you've got an unusual name, you feel pretty confident. And sometimes if you've got a family, you've got a group of multiple people in the collection of all those facts, you also feel pretty confident. But let me tell you, in addition to the positive, the tailwind of having David's work, there's a headwind. And you can sort of see this would be an average page. Some pages are clear, they're perfect. The penmanship is perfect. Other pages, I think the scribe was drunk, or it was 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon and he was trying to finish his shift. And sometimes scanning also presents challenges. So this is our second source. And the good news is that a large part of overlap basically just proves the work that Junius did for his volume Westervaarschau. So what does this look like on the database? Well, this is a second event. We see immigration, arrival, passenger list, and I actually can click on this and actually I can see the actual page with the immigrant written down. Now here we have, and this is consistent, Sigfús and Gudrun, so that's the parents, and 4 children, and there's Sigurбjörg and 3 siblings, so that adds up to 4, are seen on ticket 1403. So there's, I don't know, 58 people on this page, and I don't want to sort of scan through them all, but I can go down to ticket 1403. And that's really good now because ticket often, in my mind, ticket is like who paid for this group to go. It shows you the group of people that went. Sometimes it's a family, and maybe somebody assisting with young children, or it's a relative, but it really adds to the story if you know the group of people that went. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, but we also have a ship that took them to Quebec. So there's the second source of information. The third source of information is everything else. So we have obituaries that basically say so-and-so left. And oftentimes it overlaps with Westervaarschau, it overlaps with passenger lists, but sometimes it doesn't. So we have identified other immigrants purely through obituaries, newspaper articles. US and Canadian census records back in the 1800s would often say country of birth and when did you emigrate. And when our genealogists are doing work, if they find that information, they'll put it into the database, and that just sort of extends our overall information. Parish records a little bit less useful because that was the source that Junius used for much of his Westervaarschau, but we've able to add people based on parish records and information in Iceland. Icelanders are wonderful writers. Many of them have books written, and they love genealogy, and they they will often write stories about their ancestors, digitals. So you'll have these books of some famous or non-famous just ancestor 3 or 4 generations back, and all sorts of information. And if we see books like that, we can take that and we can put it into the database, and that'll have information about who immigrated when. Cousins forms, that's just our members, will tell us, I have family information. I have a picture from Iceland. I have just stuff. I have information, and the database is a wonderful place to store that information, not only for us, but for my children, my grandchildren. And then the last is just other things. It's sort of all-encompassing everything else. If you were born in Iceland and you died in North America, there's a pretty good chance you immigrated. So that's if all else fails, that's what we have. And what does that look like? Well, it's the same event type, immigration, Iceland to the Americas. And you'll notice here, not found in Vesturfarskrá, and the information is based on census 1906 and 1916. Oops. I thought there was, oh yes, here's a note on this page. So I think there's sort of it goes without saying, but don't focus entirely on these. There's other information, census, Iceland information prior to the immigration, North American information after. And this one here, if you understood Icelandic, it says moved to the Western Hemisphere in 1882 from Seyðisfjörður, and there's the Sisla, Norður-Sisla. So this is just to give you a sort of an idea of what we have before I launch into what I really want to talk about, which is making a story out of all this. So we have a little bit over 12,000 people where we've got both Vesturfarskrá and passenger lists. Another 1,300 people where we have Vesturfarskrá only. We haven't found a passenger list. We have 2,400 people where we have passenger lists and no Vesturfarskrá. And then we have 1,300 other people where we don't have the Vesturfarskrá or passenger list, but we have that other list of things that I said: books, descendants, census, born in Iceland, died in North America, for a grand total of almost 18,000. So that's what we're looking at now. And I would say that we have become the new gold standard. Vesturfarskrá is great. And maybe we have extended it a little bit. So with that, let me start. Well, actually, before I start, one of the questions I always get, so I'm just going to sort of head that off. If you had keen eyes, you would notice that this family left Iceland on one ship and they arrived in Quebec on another ship. So it's sort of how is this possible? And the answer is, back in the immigration period, there was no passenger service from Iceland. Iceland was a Danish colony, and transportation such as it existed was basically trade. So there were trade ships that went from Denmark and they exported stuff to Iceland, and then they picked up raw materials, fish and wool and horses, and they took it to the UK, and then they picked up raw materials back for manufacturing in Denmark. And that, plus mail ships, was perhaps the only transportation. So if you wanted to leave Iceland, you basically hitched a ride on a cargo ship. Now, once you were in the UK, and pretty much all of these ships went to Edinburgh. You'll see Leith as the port for Edinburgh. And then you take a train often to Glasgow, sometimes to Liverpool, and then left. You'll also see the port Greenock, which is sort of the same thing as Leith for Edinburgh, Greenock for Glasgow. It's not strictly a suburb, but it's kind of the port for Glasgow. And from there, off to the North America. Now, the first ship was relatively small, and it would be 30 people, or maybe in the later period up to 100 people, and all Icelanders. They were immigrating. There was a little bit of tourist trade, but primarily immigration. The second ship would be much bigger, and it would be very different. So if you've watched the PBS series on immigration, with Poles and Ukrainians and Swedes and Danish and all sorts of people, that was the melting pot of people. So there were 1,000 people, and the Icelanders on that ship could be as few as one, could be a family, and sometimes there were more. The one that we're going to look at, I think, at about a little bit under 400 people, Icelanders on the ship. So anyway, we have two events in the database: the first leaving Iceland, and the second is arriving in the New World. So this is what I want to talk about. Let's start building your ancestors' immigration story. So how do you do that? Well, who's your immigrating ancestor? And here I thank you, Natalie, for volunteering your ancestors because yours are, I would say, representative, but they're represented in a really good way because they've got a lot of variety to their stories. So we're going to start with you, and I'm just going to switch from PowerPoint over to like a real slide. So if I'm Natalie, I can click on my page and go to her page, and then I can go to a tab at the top which says Ancestors. So here's Natalie, her parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents. If you remember, I talked about if you were born in Iceland and you died in North America, that was a pretty safe assumption that you emigrated. So I'm going to just mouse over here. Here's Peter, her great-grandfather. Oh, but he was born in Manitoba and died in British Columbia, so he didn't emigrate. But he's Icelandic, so maybe it was his parents. And he married Herdis. She also was born in Manitoba and died in British Columbia, so she didn't emigrate. So what are we going to do? Well, the good thing about the database is there's lots of options. Let's go back another generation and see what happens. So here we have, I guess we'll stretch this out a little bit more. I now have 4 people here. Vigfus, and yes, he was born in Iceland and died in Canada. So he emigrated. I happen to know he emigrated in his 20s. So he was a single person. And Vilberg emigrated as a child, and they were 2 Icelandic people that married, and then they had a family in North America. I'm not going to use them as my example. My next, let me go over here, Johan Christian. Well, he's another immigrant, and he emigrated as a child and with his parents. And the person I'm going to use is Sigurbjörg, Sigfús daughter. She's a representative, I would say. So let's click on her. And we've already seen some of this by example. So there's the immigration, Iceland to the Americas, and the passenger list. So before I launch into this, I'm just going to say, we actually have a pretty good story before we even start. We know that she left with her family. We know they left in 1878. We know the farm they left from. We know the grouping of people that left. We knew the port that they left from and the ship that they left on. We know that they went to Edinburgh. We know that they took a train to Glasgow. We know that they left on the SS Waldenessian on Sunday, July the 21st, 1878, and arrived in Quebec on Thursday, August the 1st, 1878. We can see them on the passenger list, and we can see information about the ship, and we can see their names on the passenger list. So before I even start, I have a pretty good story. But I'm not going to stop there. This is my starting point. I'm going to say, here is a little globe, and I'm going to click on this globe, and I'm going to learn more about the farm that they left from. So here is the farm that they left from. That doesn't tell me very much because I don't have scale and I don't sort of know where it is, but let me just back this up. And I now can see Iceland. That's the west of Iceland. No, it isn't. That's the east of Iceland. Okay, so I now know roughly where they left from. And if I go the other direction, through the work of Doug and his Places team, they've actually geotagged virtually all of the farms in Iceland, and you can actually see this is the farm. These are the buildings that are there today, but this is the farm that they left from in 1878. Now I'm going to, I love this. I'm going to go full screen just because it's kind of neat. And I'm going to, if I were going to Iceland and I wanted to visit this farm, well, what can I do? And it looks like my internet is slow. It's never happened, but I'll try that one more time. Maybe I'll try it at a smaller screen. It might. Okay, well, I apologize. Oh, there it is. I don't know what happened. Here we are. So this is the ring road, the number 1. So I'm on the ring road, and if I take a take a right at Highway 925 and I go up a ways, I'm going to actually see a turnoff here in a little road, and I can actually go to that farm. So this is going to help me if I want to visit Iceland and visit that farm. One of the other things that's kind of nice about this is that this is Google Street View, so I can use all of those facilities in Street View. I can actually go here and I can see what this looks like today. Now, some of the street views are very close to the farm and you can actually see the buildings. This one here is over the ridge, so it isn't exactly great. But I'm going to go down the road a little bit to the back one. And I can actually see the sign to the farm. And if I go down that round over the bushes, there's the farm that they left from. So that's pretty neat. And if I had a GPS, I could plug the lat and long in and I wouldn't even need a map. It would take me right there. So let's go a little bit farther. I could have clicked on the picture. This is a wonderful picture that we've purchased from Matslund. You can purchase a higher quality version of the same picture, and then you can zoom in on it. But here's an aerial picture of the farm, and we have many farms in Iceland where we have this, and you can see this. There's a river flowing through here, and there's the farm. Looks like it's very lush. This is that Highway 985, and this is the road off to the farm, and this is why we couldn't see over, because there was sort of a ridge over the farm. Sort of neat. We haven't really done much here, but I'm sort of feeling connected already. Like this is neat. So let me go back. This is back to the place. I have a list of all of the people that are recorded as being born on that place, that died on that place, and we have census information. This information is growing every day based on the work of our volunteers. But what I want to point out is there's a block on immigration, and this essentially is what you would see in Vesturfarskrá. Here are the people, the 3 people that emigrated in 1878, and the 6 people that emigrated, I'm sorry, in 76 and then 78. And I can click on them and I can get the other textual information that was on that page. So this is pretty much everything that is in Vesturfarskrá. So I'm learning more just by clicking. Well, they left from the port of Seyðisfjörður. I actually clicked the wrong place. Here's Seyðisfjörður. So wouldn't it be nice if we had pictures of Seyðisfjörður back in the immigration period? And we do. So nothing back as far as 1978, but 1878. But we have a picture 1885. Oh, I'm sorry. This is 1835. This is 1887. So we can see that this is not a huge place that they left from. What may have happened is they may have had to row out in a boat to a ship that was anchoring out in the harbor, as many are immigrants. But let's just read this, because let's learn about the harbor that they left from. Seyðisfjörður is a fishing village cut in half by a river that runs through the town. There's an important herring fishery in this area, and immigrants would have to depend on local hospitality in these small villages as they waited for their ships to arrive. So let me just go back to here and this map. So here's Seyðisfjörður, and here's the farm. So Natalie's ancestors had to walk. They had to cross this river, and they had to walk with all of the belongings that they were taking to North America to the port of Seyðisfjörður, where they were put up by Icelandic hosts while they waited for the ship to come. And then they were rowed out to the ship, and then they started their journey. So pretty interesting stuff. Well, let us go back. What do we know? Whoops, I'm not doing a very good job of clicking here. Probably in 90% of the cases, we actually have pictures of these immigrant ships. In this one, I could not find a ship, but I did find a Danish artist that drew pictures of ships off the coast of Iceland in 1878. Well, that's the year that they left. Now, I don't know this for a fact, but I suspect that this is an Icelandic fishing vessel. It's a sailing vessel. And I think this is probably a trading vessel. It's certainly got the Danish flag on it. And what you'll notice is it's a sailing vessel, but at some point, added steam to it. So there's a steam propeller here. Now, I don't know that this is a good image for the ship, but I think it is. I do know that it's got this would be its license plate. And I know it was launched in 1861, so it was 17 years old when the emigrants left. I know it was 180 feet long. I know it was 26 feet wide, which is not very big for a ship to be going from Iceland to the UK. They likely stopped along the way. And anyway, so a ship 405 tons, and you can see that it was propelled by steam. And 99 horsepower, not a huge engine either. So probably mostly under sail. And then if the winds weren't blowing, then you could start it up. Now, there's notes. This one here says it was a cargo ship, not a passenger ship, although it was retrofitted, and sometime before 1915, it was fitted for 41 passengers. So isn't that interesting? So anyway, that's the additional information that I've got from the first event. So let's go to the second event. And the first thing I'm going to do is ticket 1403. So let's click on this passenger page, and I can see 1403. And here's Sigfús, Gudrun, and then the children, Gudrun, Sigurður. This is the ancestor that we're looking at. She's a 4-year-old girl here. So here's the parents, ages 37 and 33. And the columns, a 7-year-old male, 4-year-old female, 2-year-old male, and then an infant. And I happen to know the child because of the database. It just says child here. And boy, it almost looks like I know the room that they were in. I wish I had a deck plan for this ship, but they were in aft 32, this group together. So that's interesting. Let us, we've sort of already done this. We've talked about the Waldenissian was the name of the ship. Here we do have a picture of the ship. We know this particular voyage had left on Sunday, July 1st. It arrived on Thursday, August the 1st. And here's a picture. This is a real picture of the ship. So this is not an approximation. And I have the same dimensions out of this. This was built about the same time, 1861, also 17 years old. This is much longer, almost twice as long, 300 feet. Still small by today's standard. Beam of 33 feet, displacement of 2,200 tons. And it also has steam propulsion, much larger. It's not 99 horsepower, it's now 350 horsepower, which is still small. So passengers, 450 people on that 1878 trip. So are you feeling close to your ancestor yet, Natalie? Okay. This, I think, is one of the areas that I'm most proud of. The ancestor left on this ship, and up until this point, we've seen one page, but actually, in this particular case, there are 8 pages of ancestors, 8 pages of passenger lists. And Sigurberg is on page 5. So here's back to, this is what we've seen before. But I can actually look at any of these pages. And I can see other people on the trip. Now, many of these trips, there were other non-Icelanders that we have not included those. We focused exclusively on pages that have got Icelanders, but let's just look at these cover pages. So here's, what do we have here? Leaving Sunday, July the 21st, arriving Thursday. And here we have Waldenissian from Glasgow, sailed 21st July, arrived 1 August. So that's pretty consistent. Let's go to another cover page and look at this down here. 2 children died on the voyage and were buried at sea. Well, it's pretty personal. Well, let's go further down. 2 children died at sea and 1 child died in the shed. Now, I don't know where the shed is. It might be leaving Edinburgh. It might be arriving in Quebec. But it says 1 old man also died on board. And what does it say? Died aboard ship at the wharf. So we had 4 people that died on this voyage. This was not sort of a passenger ship that we're used to today. And look at that. This is interesting as well. 1 female child was born at sea on this voyage. So I kind of like this. When they total, they have some sort of formula where if you're below a certain age, you count as half a person. So you've got these adults in halves. But the other count is people, and they call them souls, which is a nice generic term in this politically correct world where you're looking for males and females and adults and whatever. Souls is a nice generic term that applies to everybody. I kind of like that. So let's drill a little bit in page 5. It might be worthwhile to see who is connected to this page. So you don't have to do this. We've done that for you. Who's on this page? This will be roughly, not exactly, the order that's on the page. So I apologize, I'm going to whip through to 1403. And my focus person is Sigurd, because that's the last person that I was on. And this is her father, parent, her mother, parent, her sibling, herself, and then her other siblings. And if she had other relatives, it would say that. The other thing, and I'm just going to try to, oops, went a little bit too far. I'm going to try to make it a little bit smaller so I can just show you here. My mouse wheel is too sensitive. Oh, come on. Okay. The other thing that's interesting is that because of the work that Doug and his team have done on places, mostly Doug, I can plot the farm that they left from, and I can plot the farm that everybody else on this page left from as well. And I can say, we have in group 1404, a number of people that left from a farm 5 kilometers. So they would be neighbors. That's what, a couple miles? 1403, this is 0 kilometers because that's the group that we're looking at. 1402, these are 2 kilometers away. So on this page, we have a family unit, and we have a couple of other family units that are their neighbors. And I've learned that just from looking at this display. I'm just going to show you a couple things here. Because I don't like to mouse through all of this, I'm going to filter only the relatives and close neighbors. And if I go to the bottom now, I only see 14 people listed instead of 59. But that allows me to sort of go through all of the pages. So page 1, there's nobody. Page 2, there is, we have second cousin of spouse. Well, that's a bit of a red herring for me because Sigurd is a 4-year-old girl. So the fact that somebody related to her spouse is really not important to me, but my focus is on her. If I were to change the focus, and I'll show you how to do that in a second here, to her parents, I might have a slightly different focus. So here is Sigfus, 178364. So I'm going to put him here, 178364, and I'm going to refresh the screen. And I'm now looking at him. So I'm going to go back to page 2, and I'm not going to see any relatives of somebody that will marry Sigurd in 20 years. And I'm going to go down through here, and I'm not going to find anybody. Oh yes, I have a second half cousin. So I think you can see I can go through and find. Now, I could also figure out, well, how is that person related? Well, here it is. I now have Gudrun, which is the wife, and Haldor is the person on the passenger list, and how are they related? And this is how they're related. Okay, so I'm going to move on. And what am I not going to talk about? We've talked about all of this. Okay, so let's extend the story even a little bit more. I know that they left the farm. I know they arrived in Quebec. Why did they leave? Well, I have this wonderful thing called timeline. And this gives me a timeline of things that happened in Iceland. And I know they left in 1878. So let's see if I can find some things in and around 1878 that might explain why this family left. So, sometimes an event has to happen and there's a lag between the event and an action. So I'm looking at this, 1875, and it says 71 people left Iceland. Oh, and we have a volcanic eruption, Mount Askau. We have another eruption in 1876 and another eruption in 1878. So this was a period of volcanic activity in Iceland. For those of you that are around in the 70s, when was it? What is the Mount Helen? St. Helens was blew up in Washington. I was in Winnipeg, and I remember there was ash on that car in Winnipeg. So there's a huge amount of sulfur that comes up, a huge amount of ash. And if you're a farmer, chances are that your fields are not going to be able to produce as much. And in fact, during these periods of high volcanic activity, there was a lot of famine, a lot of livestock starved to death, a lot of people starved to death. And if you were a farmer in the north of Iceland, you might be inclined to leave. And that I can't prove that, but that might be adding to our story about Natalie's immigrants. So this is another really good place to go. So let me go from here to another very interesting thing. So off to the left, you can see if I click on special collections, there's a lot of the information that I've already shown you. We've already shown you the specific ports and the passenger lists and the ships. I want to show you now the stories of the crossing. So these are real people that were immigrants that decided to write about their experience. Now, you might be really lucky and find your ancestor in this list, but there's only 12, so probably not. But I'm going to tell you that in some respects, the ships were similar. So the hardships that one person encountered would be similar to somebody else. Now, this goes over the immigration period. So if I were to go down here and I find, oh, here's somebody that immigrated in 1876, well, that's only 2 years different. So I might want to look at this, and here we have 8 pages of a story that was published in the Cavalier in North Dakota about this person's experience leaving Iceland. So if you were to read that, that would add more color to your ancestors' immigration. Well, I'm getting to the end, but I have one more interesting and completely different. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed something. Oh, I'm sorry. I said that I was only going to talk about the first half of the trip with one exception, and this is the exception. Kathy Josephson has an absolutely excellent presentation. It's about half an hour, Sails, Rails, Rivers, and Trails. And she talks about the second half. So she talks about what people took with them, the trunks, the keepsakes they took from Iceland. She talks about how what happened in North America changes over the immigration period. Sometimes you had to take riverboats to Chicago and trains and barges up from North Dakota to Winnipeg. And in the later times, you could take a train to Winnipeg. She talks about the second half of that journey, and she talks about some more personal things. So I would strongly encourage you to listen to that, and that'll add even more color. Okay, so I'm back to the last major thing, and then I've got a couple of closing slides. Family immigrations. So let me sort of say that we've been looking at a family grouping that left during 1878. And we looked at the family that left. We looked at perhaps extended family that left at the same time. We looked at neighbors that left, but it's all 1878. But I'm going to tell you that there's a number of situations that occurred. I think it might be my next slide. What would happen is sometimes a father and an older son would emigrate, and the wife and some other younger children might emigrate 2 weeks later or 2 months later. And I guess the idea, I think, would be the father was trying to set things up. He was maybe trying to get a job, or he's going to try to find a place for the family to stay, so that there would be less confusion and the family just would have something settled by the time they got there. So families didn't always leave together. And that's what this is attempting to do, is attempting to show you for a family when they left. So going back to, I see what I'm doing wrong. Going back to Sigurberg, there's 2 families that everybody has. One is their parental family with siblings, and the second is their spousal family with children. And depending on who you're looking at, you might choose one family or the other. In this particular case, Sigurberg is it's her parents that are going. So I'm going to put that first family in. and I have written down the number here. It's F54766. So I can show that family, and this is exactly what I would have expected. All these people left in 1878. Maybe I can make that a little bit bigger. They all left in 1878, and you can see that there were some more family added after that. So not very exciting, but let's go up a generation and look at the father's family. And here's Sigfus, and you can see not a lot of his family emigrated. But what about Gudrun? Well, here she is here. Well, she left in 1878, and her mother and two siblings left a year later. So that adds to the story. Maybe she went and wrote back and said, hey, come on over. The water's fine. This is really, really good stuff. I don't know that, but the facts would support that. I can also go a little bit left and right, and I can look at nieces and nephews. So here we have, this is the family again, and the father's family, not a lot of immigration here. So that's sort of as we expected. And we'll look at the mother's siblings and family. And now we can see another whole story. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, other than to show you that you can see that over a period of time, they emigrated in 1890, 1892, 1893. I'll talk a little bit about why this happened, I think, on my next slide. Here we are. So families emigrated at different times, week apart. I've already talked about that. Years apart. Sometimes a father went and the family went a year later. Sometimes an older child, maybe an adult child, would leave and would leave to earn money so that he could send it back to bring the rest of the family. And this last screen that I showed you allows you to kind of put that together. As important to me about who emigrated, who didn't emigrate, who stayed. That's sort of an interesting story as well. So anyway, there is that. Before my summary slide, I just want to point out that it's important to look at everything. And by everything, I mean, I've been talking about two events, and I maybe showed you some census events as well. But there's also notes. If there's events, often there's an expand all button that you can put on the page, and that expands lots of notes that might otherwise be hidden. And what you're going to see sometimes, and I'm just going to run through some exceptions here, people that Vester Fresco said emigrated that didn't. Well, why didn't they? Well, maybe they were sick. Sometimes you'll see Vester Fresco said they emigrated 1 year, but we have a passenger list for a year later. Well, maybe they were sick. We've seen people that were due to emigrate and they became pregnant, they had a child. And maybe they didn't emigrate at all, or maybe they emigrated a year later. Some people died and didn't get immigrates. Some people emigrated to the UK and stayed there for 5 years and then went on. Some people emigrated to Denmark and from Denmark to North America. Some emigrated and returned. We capture those when we can. They didn't like it there, so they went back. Maybe they were lonely. Some people were lonely in Iceland and decided to emigrate a second time. And we have situations people emigrated 3 times. Sometimes, and actually probably the main event here would be somebody immigrates, I mentioned before, and they write back to their mother, and their mother says, I'd like to come, but I don't want to come alone. And the child says, well, I'm going to come back to Iceland and we'll stay for 4 months and then you can come with me. Sometimes these are love interests. Somebody went to North America to find out what life was like there, but left a fiance back in Iceland. Well, rather than send for her, they went back to Iceland and the two came back together. Lots of interesting things happened. On the ships, we've seen many situations where 2 single people arrived in different parties on the ship and after a year became married. So they met each other. We found situations where children I'm looking for a good word, but children were started on the voyage. Lots of information. So I'm going to close up by telling you that there's a huge amount of information if you just read the information on the page. And if you dig a little bit deeper, you can add color to that story. use of the timeline, use of the groups going together, relatives, neighbors, extended family to look at immigration patterns, who did not immigrate. I have one last slide, and that is just for those of you that have access to the database, hopefully you're going to say, wow, I didn't know that was there. I'm going to look. Those of you that didn't know about the database may have an interest in joining, and there is membership information if you go to IcelandicRoots.com. And I am now going to stop for questions.
Thank you so much, Dave. I just wanted to add in 2 comments. It is so hard to find all this detail and information on your own. I mean, I'm trying to do it from my grandmother's side, and they were Scottish and English, and it takes hours of research, and especially if you don't know what you're doing. So to be able to come to Icelandic Roots and get a membership, and it's all there, you just explore it, and you know it's been vetted by genealogists and experts and professionals. I can't emphasize how incredible it is to use. And the second point I wanted to make was that if you are listening, watching this webinar, and you're planning to go to Iceland and you have Icelandic background, this is an invaluable resource, because I never knew where Skógagarður was. And do you know, I've at least 3 times driven on the ring road through Egilsstaðir and did not know it was just a turnoff. So it's a reason that I have to go back, because it's one of the farms that I haven't been to yet, and now I know where it is. So I'm kind of kicking myself, but one day I'll go back there and see that particular farm. So that's incredible. I'm going to read there's a comment here from Willie, who has also been working on this project, and he just wanted to share that the SS Patrick ship picked up immigrants in the north of Iceland and sailed directly to Quebec in the year of 1874. It was one of the few direct trips.
Yeah,
so that's a cool.
The SS Huron also did that in 1883.
Oh.
So there's 2 exceptions, and also there's something else that's sort of interesting. Later in the 1920s, you'll find fishing boats that came out from Boston, and they would pick up, I don't know if they picked up an Icelandic girl as a cook or whatever, but we have some one-offs that came back in 1920s on fishing boats back to Boston. So yes, there are exceptions, and I think that's the point I wanted to make, is that read the page, because there's no such thing as like everybody did this. There's lots of exceptions.
Yeah. And then Jody has a comment just to say, well done, Dave. I learned so much from you with each encounter. Thanks so much. Congratulations. Yes, and from us too, to all the Icelandic Roots volunteers who make this possible for the rest of us. Jody says, it's fantastic information, incredible, and so exciting. Yeah. And I feel like I was treated to a really, I wasn't expecting to learn so much, Dave. I mean, I knew I was going to see a lot of information, but a lot of it was new for me. So I feel like I got a private genealogy session. Thank you. And if any of my family is attending, I just wanted to say, I know for a fact that there is so much accurate and verified information in the database. You are not expected to memorize my tree. I think in the beginning you had Vigfús and Jón Reykdal mixed up when you described them, but that's okay, because I know in the database it's correct. So if anyone messages me later from my family, I promise it's in there properly and Dave doesn't memorize our tree. Lynette says, thank you so much. Traveled to Iceland knowing 2 sets of my ancestors emigrated from Iceland. Joined Icelandic Roots prior to my journey, and your hard work has added so much. I will be joining and searching for more stories. Thank you. Oh, and there's someone who thinks they're related to me. So send us an email at the INLNA, or it's inlna@gmail.com, and we'll connect and see if we are related. And Jim is going back to Iceland in August 2024. And Andrew says this was terrific, new info and a recap of other information. Thanks so much, Dave. Yeah, nothing compares to actually seeing someone use the database live, because you can't really show it. And it's not the same seeing pictures or just hearing about it, but when you actually see it, it's amazing. And Andrew says, thank you, Dave. I'm inspired to search more about my family. Yeah. Don't think I had one more question myself. Was you mentioned about the volcanoes as one of the factors why people left, and you can see them in the events. Is there a way to see them on the map as well? So if you saw someone's farm location, could you also see where that volcano is?
I think you can get that information through Google and other sources.
Yeah.
We don't have the volcanoes plotted on the maps at present. That might be something we might consider later on, because you're right, that would add to the story if you could actually see them. Some of these, if you were from Iceland, you know exactly where they were. We're not from Iceland, so we don't. So that's a really good question, and unfortunately, the answer is sort of not through the
Not
database.
yet.
Well, there you go. Yeah, not yet.
The answer is not yet. But yeah, with the famous one like Askia, you can just Google it and it'll come up on Google Maps. It's an easy to spell one too.
Yes.
And Gwen says, thank you so much. This is so interesting. Yeah.
I was expecting hard questions, so thank you for the response, and thank you for not asking me hard questions.
Well, Doug and I both know that you explain things very, very thoroughly and in a way that's easy to understand, Dave. So I know everyone's going to be absorbing this information, and if they have further questions, they can reach out to Icelandic Roots. Go to IcelandicRoots.com, become a member, fill out the cousins form. There's a whole bunch of ways you can get in touch to learn more and get involved. So I don't see any more questions coming in. So I just want to really thank you, Dave. Oh, got one more comment anyway. Julie says, enjoyed the presentation. My dad arrived in North America on a fishing trawler as a 17-year-old in 1949. Oh, that's a great story too.
Well, Julie, if you want to send me that information, I'll make sure it's on the database. I'm guessing I can find you on the database and maybe your dad, but you can send me any information that you'd like put on the database, support@IcelandicRoots.com, and then just attention Dave, and that'll get to me.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Dave, for your time and for this wonderful presentation. It was so informative. And again, we've been recording, so the replay will be available to share and send to your friends and family members and to your clubs. Check out IcelandicRoots.com to learn more about becoming a member and getting access to the database. Find out what INLUS is doing next for events or classes, and become a member if you're not part of one of our organizations yet. INLUS.org or com?
Org.
INLUS.org.
Yes.
And then ours as well, Icelandic National League of North America. It's INLofNA.org. We can put these in the description of the video too. But yeah, we would love for you to come to more events about Icelandic culture, heritage, language, and hopefully you join us for more events or as a member. Is there anything else I missed, Doug?
No, I think that's it. Thank you everyone for attending tonight. And it was great to have this webinar, and encourage you all to join our organizations and also your local Icelandic organizations if there is one in your area. So look for future presentations from us and from INLNA and also Icelandic Roots. We all have event calendars and encourage you to attend as many of these programs as possible. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Dave. And everyone have a good evening.
Thank you.